The early modern period, from the late 15th to the early 18th centuries, saw a dramatic increase in witchcraft accusations and trials, far surpassing those of the medieval era, making it one of history's darkest chapters. The first significant wave of witchcraft accusations in this period began in the late 15th century, marked by the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer and James Sprenger. This book, often translated as The Hammer of Witches, provided a detailed guide on identifying, prosecuting, and executing witches. It became immensely influential, endorsed by the church, and widely used by witch hunters. Several factors contributed to the surge in witchcraft accusations during this period. Firstly, the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation heightened religious tensions across Europe. Both sides sought to reinforce their religious authority and saw the eradication of witchcraft as a means to purify society. Additionally, accusations were often politically motivated, targeting individuals as scapegoats during significant social and economic upheaval. The Little Ice Age, a period of climatic cooling, led to poor harvests, famine, and disease. In such a climate of fear and uncertainty, scapegoating became common. Witches were blamed for various misfortunes, from crop failures to epidemics, leading to widespread hysteria. Moreover, the legal systems of the time played a crucial role in perpetuating the witch hunts. Unlike the medieval era, where local ecclesiastical courts handled most witchcraft cases, the early modern period saw secular courts taking a more active role. These courts often used torture to extract confessions, leading to a high number of convictions and executions. The witchcraft accusations of the early modern period left a lasting legacy on European and American societies. They reflect a time when fear, superstition, and the desire for control led to the tragic scapegoating and execution of thousands of innocent people. Understanding this dark chapter in history is crucial, as it highlights the dangers of mass hysteria and the importance of due process and rationality in times of hardship and crisis. In the early modern period, social harmony and mutual trust were vital. Everyone was expected to participate in communal activities, attend church regularly, and assist neighbors in times of need. Any deviation from these norms could be seen as a sign of deviance or malevolence. The social fabric was woven tightly, and anyone who did not fit neatly into this fabric risked being viewed with suspicion. Witchcraft accusations were often a means of reinforcing social norms and punishing those who deviated from them. If crops failed, livestock died, or disease struck, the community sought someone to blame. Introverted individuals, who were already on the fringes of social life, became easy targets. Their lack of visibility and engagement made it easier for others to project fears and anxieties onto them. Historical records from the early modern period illustrate numerous cases where individuals accused of witchcraft were those who lived on the periphery of social life. For example, women who were widowed or lived alone were disproportionately accused of witchcraft. Their isolation made them vulnerable, as they lacked the social support network that could defend them against such charges. To avoid the peril of witchcraft accusations, it was essential to integrate into the community. Building and maintaining good relationships with neighbors acted as a form of social protection. Those who were seen as helpful, pious, and involved in community life were less likely to be suspected of witchcraft. Besides social isolation, mental illnesses were often misunderstood and feared. Without the benefit of modern medical knowledge, conditions like epilepsy, schizophrenia, and depression were frequently interpreted through the lens of superstition and religion. This misunderstanding led many to view mental diseases as signs of witchcraft, resulting in tragic consequences for those afflicted. During this era, explanations for mental illnesses were largely rooted in spiritual and supernatural beliefs. Medical knowledge was rudimentary, and the distinction between physical and mental ailments was poorly understood. Symptoms of mental illness, such as hallucinations, seizures, or erratic behavior, were often attributed to demonic possession or witchcraft. Epilepsy, known as the sacred disease, was particularly feared. Its dramatic and unpredictable seizures were seen as clear evidence of supernatural interference. In many cases, those suffering from epilepsy were believed to be possessed by evil spirits or in league with the devil. The violent convulsions and loss of consciousness that characterized epileptic seizures were mysterious and terrifying to observers, reinforcing the association with malevolent forces. One notable case of this is Elizabeth Planeker. Elizabeth Planeker, or Elsa Planeker, 1513-1583, was an alleged Austrian witch. She was the only person executed for sorcery in the city of Vienna. Elsa Planeker was born around 1513 as Elisabeth Holzgassner in Pielemund, a small settlement near the town of Melk in Lower Austria. Her parents operated a mill on the right bank of the Pielach on behalf of the lordship. The original location of this mill is now silted up and no longer exists. She had several siblings, but only the shipman, Vitus Holzgassner, is known by name, who later lived in Melk. Elsa married a miller, about whom nothing else is known except the family name Baumgartner. It is likely that he died early, as divorce was not allowed at that time, and Elsa married a second time. From this marriage, at least 2 known children were born: Acadius, who took over his father's mill and became wealthy, and Margarethe. Elsa married a second time, to a cottager named Planeker, who probably worked a noble estate as a destitute. This estate was most likely the Gschwendhof in the municipality of Rammersdorf in Lower Austria near St. Pölten. Her landlord was Georg Achaz Matzeber zu Goldegg, and she herself was under the jurisdiction of the Folkert, Freiherr von Auersperg court administration. Around 1550, her daughter Margarethe married farmer Georg Schlüterbauer from Strannersdorf in the municipality of Mank. Margarethe and Georg first had 3 children in succession: Katharina, Ursula, and Hensel. After that, they may not have planned any more children, as there was a period of about 10 years without births. Then Anna was born, and Margarethe died in childbirth, but before her death, she made her mother promise to take care of the girl, as Georg Schlüterbauer increasingly turned to drinking and became violent. From that point on, a typical mother-in-law-son-in-law conflict probably arose. The 3 Schlüterbauer children all died allegedly in their sleep in the same year. Only Anna, who now lived with her grandmother, survived. Schlüterbauer began by accusing his mother-in-law, who had converted from Catholicism to Protestantism in Catholic Austria, of being a witch. The accusation was that she wouldn't give him his only child back and was enchanting her more and more. She was supposedly taking her exclusively to Protestant church services and preparing her for the devil. The mentally disabled, epileptic, and pubescent 15-year-old girl at the time couldn't refute the suspicion herself and was considered possessed by the devil by those questioning her. Epilepsy was a strong indication of this at the time. Anna apparently got confused under the pressure of the interrogation, and the results probably corresponded to the wishful thinking of the interrogators. For example, she stated that her grandmother had fed snakes with milk. However, it was probably once a snake that had found its way to the milk that farmers often put out for the cats of the farm. She also spoke of a large, black, shaggy man whom her grandmother had introduced to her. Her grandmother supposedly asked, "Annele, do you want him?" This was probably a suitor who had taken a liking to Anna. The clergy exorcised her 3 times, which apparently did not bring any improvement. After the 3rd exorcism in Vienna, her mental disability was recognized, and she was initially kept in the citizens' hospital. But Schlüterbauer did not give up. He increasingly pressured the authorities, so that Elsa Planeker was finally arrested and taken to Vienna in mid-1583. However, the Viennese doctors and priests described her as only old and weak-minded. They pleaded for her to also be taken to the citizens' hospital. But preacher Georg Scherer appeared on the scene. He gave a hate speech against witches in general, and Elsa Planeker in particular, in front of St. Stephen's Cathedral. This stirred up the people, who then demanded her execution. In the cellar of the Malefichspitzbubenhaus on Rauhensteingasse in Vienna, the old and sick Elsa Planeker was subjected to terrible interrogations 3 times, during which she confessed to everything she was asked. She was executed on September 27, 1583. Her granddaughter Anna was placed in the Barbara Convent for Secular Women, which was located on Postgasse in Vienna's 1st district. And Georg Scherer died in 1605 when he was struck down by a stroke during a similar hate speech in the church pulpit in Linz. Georg Schlüterbauer, who had handed over the farm to his son long before his time, decided to live as a day laborer near Texing in Lower Austria for the rest of his life. During the 16th and 17th centuries, fear of witchcraft reached its peak, leading to the enactment of specific laws in the British Isles. The Witchcraft Acts, a series of laws in England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and the British colonies, established penalties for practicing witchcraft in response to this heightened paranoia. The Witchcraft Act of 1542, passed during the reign of Henry VIII, was the first formal law against witchcraft in England. This act made it a felony to practice witchcraft, use sorcery or enchantment to find lost goods or cause harm, invoke or conjure evil spirits. The penalties were severe, including death and forfeiture of property. However, this act was repealed in 1547 under the reign of Edward VI. The Second Witchcraft Act was enacted in 1563 under Elizabeth I. This act differentiated between types of witchcraft. Lesser offenses, like using witchcraft to find lost goods, were punishable by imprisonment. Greater offenses, such as using witchcraft to cause death or harm, were punishable by death. This act laid the groundwork for subsequent witchcraft legislation and aimed to maintain social order and religious conformity. The first case under this act was Elizabeth Lois. Elizabeth Lois is known as the first woman to be executed for witchcraft in England after the passing of the Witchcraft Act of 1563. She came from Great Waltham in Essex and was married to the farmer John Lois of Chelmsford. Elizabeth was active as a cunning woman. The term cunning folk originally referred to folk healers in Britain, and their practices were known as the cunning craft. They were herbalists, and their services also included thwarting witchcraft. She was initially accused of making people ill by Philippa Deal, Agnes Devonshire, and her own husband. She was brought before the Archdeacon's Court on evidence collated by the local vicar Brian Needham in June 1564, but she was not convicted. However, during the same year, she was accused of causing the deaths of 3 individuals by using witchcraft. She was retried and sentenced to death for murder by magic in June 1564. Her execution was postponed because she falsely claimed to be pregnant, and she was executed on March 30th, 1565. The second case under the Witchcraft Act of 1563 was Agnes Waterhouse. In 1566, Agnes Waterhouse was accused of witchcraft along with 2 other women, Elizabeth Frances and Joan Waterhouse. All 3 women were from the same village, Hatfield Peveril. Agnes confessed to being a witch and claimed her familiar was a cat, later turned into a toad, named Satan, sometimes spelled Sathan, which originally belonged to Elizabeth Frances. Agnes was put on trial in Chelmsford, Essex in 1566 for using witchcraft to cause illness to William Finn, who died on November 1st, 1565. She was also charged with using sorcery to disease livestock, cause illness to farmers, and bring about the death of her husband. Her 18-year-old daughter, Joan Waterhouse, was also accused but found not guilty of the same crime. Joan's testimony ultimately helped convict the other 2 women. Agnes was executed, but it is possible that Agnes told Joan to help convict her, so that Joan would be found not guilty and escape persecution. During the trial, Elizabeth Frances was examined first. She confessed to possessing the familiar, a cat named Sathan. Elizabeth Frances received the cat from her grandmother, Mother Eve of Hatfield Peveril, who taught her witchcraft when she was 12 years old. Elizabeth Frances kept the cat for 15 or 16 years, before eventually giving it to Agnes Waterhouse. According to Elizabeth Frances, the cat spoke to her in a strange, hollow voice and would do anything for her in exchange for a drop of blood. Elizabeth Frances was the first to be accused, and is the one who accused Agnes Waterhouse, but a later pamphlet from a 1579 trial revealed that Elizabeth Frances and Agnes Waterhouse were sisters. 2 days after the trial finished, Agnes Waterhouse was executed. At this time, she repented and asked for forgiveness from God. She also confessed to her attempt to send the cat to hurt and damage the goods of her neighbor, the tailor named Wardall. However, this was regarded as having been unsuccessful because Wardall was so strong in faith. When questioned about her church habits, Agnes Waterhouse said that she prayed often, but always in Latin, because the cat forbid her from praying in English. The Witchcraft Act of 1604, which followed the Witchcraft Act of 1563, is particularly significant due to its more severe provisions. King James I, who ascended to the English throne in 1603, had a profound personal interest in witchcraft and demonology. His earlier experience with alleged witchcraft in Scotland, particularly the North Berwick witch trials of 1590-1591, had a lasting impact on him. He authored a book on the subject, Demonology, in 1597, which articulated his beliefs about the reality and dangers of witchcraft. His views strongly influenced the legislative approach to witchcraft in England. The Witchcraft Act of 1604 introduced several stringent measures compared to previous legislation. The act made it a capital offense to use, practice, or exercise any invocation or conjuration of any evil and wicked spirit, effectively making any engagement with spirits punishable by death. It expanded the range of punishable offenses to include not only the actual practice of witchcraft, but also consulting with witches or evil spirits. Lesser offenses, such as using witchcraft to find lost or stolen goods, resulted in imprisonment and public shaming, but repeat offenses could lead to harsher penalties. This period saw some of the most infamous witch trials, including the Pendle witch trials of 1612 and the Bideford witch trial of 1682, which was one of the last in England to result in executions. While Wales was subject to English laws, including the various witchcraft acts, the intensity of witch trials was comparatively lower. In Ireland, witch trials were also less frequent, although the 1586 trial and execution of Alice Keitler remains a notable case in Irish history. The Witchcraft Act of 1604 remained in force until it was repealed by the Witchcraft Act of 1735, which marked a significant shift in the legal treatment of witchcraft. The 1735 Act recognized witchcraft as an impossibility and reclassified it as a form of fraud, signaling a move towards a more rational and skeptical view of supernatural phenomena. The Witchcraft Act of 1735, enacted during the reign of George II, marked a significant shift in legal attitudes towards witchcraft. This act effectively ended the era of witch trials in Great Britain. It redefined witchcraft as a form of fraud, rather than a capital offense, reflecting Enlightenment attitudes that viewed belief in witchcraft as superstitious and irrational. Under the 1735 Act, those claiming to possess magical powers or practicing witchcraft were subject to fines and imprisonment, rather than execution. This legislation symbolized the transition from medieval and early modern perceptions of witchcraft to a more rational and skeptical approach. The witch trials of Trier took place in the independent Catholic Diocese of Trier in the Holy Roman Empire, present-day Germany, between 1581 and 1593. These trials are considered perhaps the largest documented witch trials in history due to the number of executions. They were among the 4 largest witch trials in Germany, alongside the Fulda, Würzburg, and Bamberg witch trials. In 1581, Johann von Schönenberg was appointed Archbishop of the independent Diocese of Trier. Schönenberg greatly admired the Jesuit order and built them a college. As part of his efforts to demonstrate his convictions, he ordered the purging of witches in society. He was responsible for the mass executions in Trier, which, due to his initiative, support, and patronage, became uniquely significant in the history of witchcraft. The persecutions in the Diocese of Trier began in 1581 and reached the city itself in 1587, leading to the deaths of about 368 people. This was possibly the largest mass execution in Europe during peacetime. This number includes only those executed within the city. The total number of executions within the entire diocese was likely even higher. While the exact number of executions has never been established, it has been suggested that up to 1,000 people were executed, though this figure remains unconfirmed. Between 1587 and 1593, 368 people were executed for sorcery in 22 villages, and in 1588, 2 villages were left with only 1 female inhabitant each. People of all classes were among the victims. 108 were men. Women and the nobility, as well as people with positions in the government and administration, were also included. The mass executions caused the population to shrink, and the executioner prospered economically, described as riding about on a fine horse, like a nobleman of the court, dressed in silver and gold, while his wife vied with noblewomen in dress and luxury. The Trier witch trials, due to their colossal size, attracted great attention in contemporary Europe. News pamphlets about them were published as far away as Denmark, reviving interest in witch trials and influencing the Copenhagen witch trials, which in turn were connected to the famous North Berwick witch trials. Following the witch trials of Trier is the Fulda witch trials, 1603-1606. The Fulda witch trials, led by Prince Balthasar von Dernbach, were a significant witch hunt in the Holy Roman Empire. Occurring between 1603 and 1606, these trials resulted in the execution of around 200 people. Following the Fulda witch trials is the Würzburg witch trials. The Würzburg witch trials, conducted in the Prince Bishopric of Würzburg in the Holy Roman Empire, stand as one of the largest and most brutal witch hunts in history. Under the reign of Prince Bishop Philip Adolf von Ehrenberg, approximately 900 people were executed for witchcraft between 1626 and 1631. The trials occurred during the 30 Years' War, a period fraught with social, political, and religious turmoil. The Catholic Church's efforts to reassert its dominance in the wake of the Protestant Reformation played a significant role in fueling the witch hunts. Additionally, a series of poor harvests, plagues, and economic hardship created an environment ripe for scapegoating. Prince Bishop Philip Adolf von Ehrenberg was a zealous advocate for the eradication of witchcraft. His unwavering belief in the threat posed by witches drove the trials forward with relentless intensity. The victims came from all social strata, including clerics and members of prominent families. Similar to Würzburg, the Bamberg trials occurred during the tumultuous period of the 30 Years' War. The political and religious instability, combined with economic distress and fear of the devil's influence, created a fertile ground for witch hunts. Prince Bishop Johann Georg Fuchs von Dornheim, known as the Witch Bishop, was instrumental in driving the Bamberg trials. His administration constructed a special prison, the Drudenhaus, designed specifically for housing and torturing accused witches. The meticulous documentation of these trials provides harrowing insights into the extent of the torture used and the widespread nature of the accusations. One notable case was Johannes Junius, the mayor of Bamberg, who was accused of witchcraft and executed in 1628. In a poignant letter smuggled to his daughter, he detailed the torture he endured and his coerced confession. While the German witch trials were the most notable and documented, the witch trials in France are poorly documented. Many records of former witch trials have not been preserved, making it impossible to determine the number of executions or the true extent of the trials in France. Although there is much secondary information about witch trials in France, the poor state of documentation often makes them hard to confirm. Without a national witchcraft act in France, trials fell under the jurisdiction of local courts, leading to regional variations in witch hunts. The witch trials in northern France were under the jurisdiction of the Parlement of Paris, which was generally reluctant to enforce the death penalty. However, local courts did not always defer to Paris, contributing to the difficulty in estimating the scale of witch hunts in France. Present-day northeastern France experienced severe witch hunts, but at that time, this region belonged to the Holy Roman Empire. The Parlement of Paris's jurisdiction over northern France's witchcraft trials had an inhibiting effect on executions. Between 1568 and 1625, the Parlement confirmed only 100 death sentences for witchcraft, representing less than 5% of the cases presented by local courts. The Parlement of Paris refused to classify witchcraft as an exceptional crime. In 1588, it issued regulations to prevent excessive zeal and exaggerations in witchcraft persecutions. However, local courts often ignored these recommendations, and many local witchcraft sentences went unreported or unconfirmed. In 1624, a new law required all local court sentences in northern France to be confirmed by the Parlement of Paris before execution, and the Parlement stopped confirming death sentences for witchcraft after 1625. Some witch accusations were confusing, as the accused witches admitted their guilt with evidence witnessed by many, blurring the line between the supernatural and reality. The most notable case of this is the North Berwick witch trials. The North Berwick witch trials were held in 1590, involving several people from East Lothian and Scotland, accused of witchcraft at St. Andrew's Auld Kirk in North Berwick on Halloween night. The trials lasted for 2 years and implicated over 70 individuals, including Francis Stewart, 5th Earl of Bothwell, on charges of high treason. The witches allegedly held their covens on the Auld Kirk Green, part of the modern-day North Berwick Harbour area. Confessions were extracted by torture in the old toll booth. One source for these events is a 1591 pamphlet titled News from Scotland. This was the first major witchcraft persecution in Scotland, beginning with a sensational case involving the royal houses of Denmark, Norway, and Scotland. King James VI sailed to Copenhagen to marry Anne of Denmark, sister of Christian IV of Denmark. During their return to Scotland, they experienced terrible storms and had to shelter in Norway for several weeks before continuing. At this time, interest in witch trials was revived in Denmark due to the ongoing Trier witch trials in Germany, which were described and discussed in Denmark. The admiral of the Danish fleet, Peter Munk, argued with the treasurer, Christopher Valkendorf, about the condition of the ships used to transport Anne of Denmark. The storms were blamed on the wife of an official in Copenhagen, whom Munk had insulted. The Copenhagen witch trials were held in July 1590. One of the first victims, Anna Koldings, was tortured and divulged the names of 5 other women, including Malin, the wife of the burgomaster of Helsingør. They all confessed to using sorcery to raise storms that threatened Queen Anne's voyage, and to sending devils to climb up the keel of her ship on Halloween night. In September, 2 women were executed at Kronborg. Upon hearing news of these events from Denmark, James decided to set up his own tribunal, and more than 100 suspected witches in North Berwick were arrested. Several confessed under torture to meeting with the devil in the church at night, dedicating themselves to doing evil, including poisoning the king and his household and attempting to sink the king's ship. In February 1591, James VI instructed David Seaton of Tranent to find and arrest those who had fled to England. The English ambassador, Robert Bowes, wrote that these fugitives were the worst sort of witches. David Seaton's servant, Galus Duncan, was one of the first accused. 2 significant accused persons were Agnes Sampson, a respected elderly woman from Humby, and Dr. John Fian, a schoolmaster and scholar in Prestonpans. Both initially refused to confess and were subjected to severe torture. Sampson was brought before King James in a council of nobles. She denied all charges, but after torture, she confessed to the 53 indictments against her and was eventually executed as a witch. According to the 1591 pamphlet, News from Scotland, Sampson confessed to attending a sabbat with 200 witches, including Galus Duncan. Dr. Fian also suffered severe torture, and after Fian was finally taken to the Castle Hill in Edinburgh and executed December. Scottish witches were linked to storms by the testimony of Gillis Duncan. She was a servant of David Seaton in Tranent, who forced her to make a confession. Apparently, Duncan suddenly began to exhibit a miraculous healing ability and would sneak out of the house during the night. When Seaton confronted her, She could not explain her new ability and strange behavior, and he had her tortured. While she was able to withstand many forms of torture, including pillowinks, she eventually confessed to witchcraft and accused many others of witchcraft. According to the contemporary pamphlet News from Scotland, 1591, she named numerous individuals, both women and men. But the main alleged witch directly involved in the trials were Agnes Sampson. She was a Scottish healer and purported witch, also known as the wise wife of Keith. She used the phrase contrary wind, which often appears in contemporary correspondence describing voyages. However, Sampson used it in a special sense, stating that the king's ship experienced a contrary wind to the rest of the ships in his company, which was most strange and true, as the king's majesty acknowledged. When the rest of the ships had a fair and good wind, the wind was contrary and altogether against his majesty. While the rest of the fleet sailed ahead, the king's ship alone was becalmed or driven back. James VI had not been convinced of Sampson's guilt before this last confession, but afterward, he changed his mind. On January 27, 1591, Agnes Sampson was taken to the scaffold on Castle Hill, where she was executed on January 28, 1591. And the ghost of the bald and tortured Agnes is said to roam the palace of Holyrood House from midnight to dawn to this day. These were some of the most famous witch trials and cases in Europe during the early modern period. But you might wonder how the witch craze reached Salem and who the first American witches were. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, please like this video, and we will discuss it in a future video.